Empty houses have a sound. Not silence, exactly. Something different. Something that sits just beneath silence like a breath, held for too long. Most people feel it the moment they walk in. Nina Reeves felt it the moment she pulled into the driveway. She had driven 4 hours from the city to deal with her late grandmother's house, a tall Victorian property on the edge of a village called Ashford Grey. 3 stories, original windows, a garden that had been left to itself for the 2 years since her grandmother passed. Nina had not visited once in those 2 years. She was not proud of that. She parked, cut the engine, and sat for a moment looking at the house through the windscreen. It looked exactly as she remembered it from childhood. Tall and slightly crooked and utterly itself. The kind of house that looked like it had opinions. She had always loved it as a child. She was less sure how she felt about it now. The solicitor had been clear. The house needed to be cleared, assessed, and either sold or transferred within 60 days. Nina had 60 days to decide what to do with the one place on earth that had ever felt completely like home. She got out of the car. The front door key was old and heavy and brass, just as she remembered. It turned in the lock with a sound like something waking up. She stepped inside. The hallway was dark, dusty, the smell of old wood and lavender and something she couldn't name. Something that made her feel 6 years old again in a way that was not entirely comfortable. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and that was when she heard it. A voice, faint, distant, coming from somewhere above her, upstairs, in the empty house. Nina stood very still in the hallway. She told herself it was the wind. Old houses made sounds, pipes settled, floorboards shifted. There were 100 perfectly reasonable explanations for what she had heard. She listened again. Silence. She let out a slow breath, picked up her bag, and began to climb the stairs. The staircase was exactly as she remembered. 13 steps, the 4th one creaking. The banister slightly loose on the left side. Some things never changed. She checked the first bedroom. Empty, dust on every surface. Her grandmother's reading chair still by the window. A book face down on the arm, as though someone had just stepped out for a moment and intended to return. She checked the bathroom, the second bedroom, the small study at the end of the hall, all empty, all silent. She was almost at the door to her grandmother's bedroom, the largest room at the front of the house, when she heard it again, clearer this time. A voice, a woman's voice, speaking in a low and measured tone, as though reading aloud from something, coming from inside the bedroom. Nina's hand rested on the door handle for a long moment. Then she opened it. The room was empty. Of course it was empty. But the voice was still there, soft and unhurried, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, like a radio left on in another room, or a memory playing back at just above the threshold of hearing. Nina stood in the center of her grandmother's bedroom, in the pale afternoon light, and listened, and slowly, word by word, she began to understand what the voice was saying. It was telling a story. Her story. Nina sat down on the edge of her grandmother's bed. The voice continued, calm and clear and utterly certain of itself. It spoke about Nina's childhood, about the summers she had spent in this house, about the garden and the apple tree, and the tire swing that had hung from the lowest branch until the summer she turned 12. It spoke about her grandmother, about the way she made tea, always too strong, and the way she laughed, always too loud, and the way she had of looking at you as though you were the most important person in any room she had ever been in. Nina sat and listened and did not move for a very long time. And then the voice said something that made her breath stop. It said, "The box is under the floorboard, Nina. The one beside the wardrobe. The one that has always creaked. She wanted you to find it when you were ready. She always knew you would come back." Nina looked at the floorboard beside the wardrobe, the one that had always creaked. She crossed the room slowly, knelt down, and pressed her fingers along the edge. It lifted easily. Underneath was a small wooden box, old and smooth and carved with a pattern she recognized immediately. The same pattern that had been on her grandmother's jewelry box, on the frame of the mirror in the hallway, on the cover of the notebook her grandmother had always carried. Inside the box were three things: a letter, a photograph, and a small brass key on a velvet ribbon. Nina picked up the letter first. The handwriting was her grandmother's, unmistakable. It began, "My darling Nina, if you are reading this, then you came back. I always knew you would. There are things I never told you while I was alive. Things about this house, about our family, about you. Things that could not be said out loud, but could only be left for the right moment, in the right place, by someone who loved you enough to wait." Nina read the letter twice. Then she sat back on her heels and looked around the room. The voice had stopped. The house was silent again, but it was a different silence now. Not empty, not heavy, something else entirely. Nina spent 3 days in that house. She had planned to spend one. She read every letter in the box. There were 14 of them, written over 14 years, each one dated and sealed and waiting. Her grandmother had written one every year on Nina's birthday, knowing that one day Nina would come back and find them all at once. The photograph was of Nina herself, aged perhaps 4 or 5, sitting in the garden under the apple tree, her grandmother beside her, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Nina had never seen the photograph before. She had no idea who had taken it. The brass key opened a small locked drawer in the writing desk in the study. Inside the drawer were documents, the deeds to the house, her grandmother's journals, 40 years of them in small, neat handwriting. And at the very back of the drawer, wrapped carefully in brown paper, a second box, smaller than the first, lighter. Inside was a note in her grandmother's handwriting. "This belonged to your mother. She left it here the last time she visited. She said you would know what to do with it when the time came." Nina's mother had died when Nina was 3 years old. She had no memory of her, no photographs, no stories. Her grandmother had never spoken of her, and Nina had learned not to ask. Inside the second box was a small recording device, old-fashioned, the kind used in the early 90s. Nina pressed play. A voice filled the room, a voice she had never heard before, and yet recognized immediately, the way you recognize something you have been missing your whole life without knowing what it was. Her mother's voice, speaking directly to her. "My darling girl," it said, "I don't have much time, but I have enough to tell you everything that matters. So listen carefully, because I've been waiting a very long time to tell you this." Nina sat in the study of her grandmother's house, in the quiet of a Tuesday afternoon, and listened to her mother's voice for the very first time. Outside the window, the garden moved gently in the breeze. The apple tree still stood exactly where it always had. A bird landed on the lowest branch, looked in through the window for a moment, and then was gone. Nina did not sell the house. She moved in the following month, and sometimes, in the early morning, when the light was soft and the house was quiet, she would hear it again, that voice, faint and warm and utterly certain of itself, telling its stories to anyone who was still enough to listen. That was the unseen hour, a story about the voices we carry with us, the ones we never got to hear, and the houses that hold our history long after we have forgotten to look. Some empty houses are not empty at all. They are just waiting for us to come home. Subscribe to The Unseen Hour. A brand new story is coming very soon. And remember, the people we love never truly stop speaking to us. We just have to be still enough to hear them. Good night.